Okay, I think everyone's coming in slowly, and thank you for being here today. Um, okay, excellent. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Natasha Kitano. Everyone calls me Tasha. And as you know, if you've been coming to my workshops, I'm the language and learning educator in the GRE team. So, thanks for being here today. And thanks for putting your student number into the chat so that we can record your attendance if you are a QUT student. All right, so we have an important workshop today, and we have a lot of people registered on this interesting topic, thesis by publication. So I have some wonderful guests with me. Before I introduce them, I'd like to do the acknowledgement. So QUT is on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, and I would like to pay my respect and acknowledge them as the First Nations owners of these lands where we all teach, we research, and we learn. QUT also acknowledges the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within our community. I encourage you to acknowledge the lands where you are. If you're at different places in Australia, you're welcome to do that as well in the chat. Okay, so maybe first I'm going to introduce everybody on the panel. So getting through my slides. All right, so today with me, I have Professor Marilyn Campbell. Marilyn is with the School of Early Childhood and Inclusive Education, and Marilyn has a lot of her students do thesis by publication. So she's here to give us her voice in how she helps her students through this way of presenting a thesis. We're also really lucky and privileged today to have Associate Professor Margaret Merger join us. Margaret is at the School of Education at the University of Notre Dame, and you are in Perth. Is that right, Margaret?
I sure am. Thanks a lot for inviting me to be involved in this today, Natasha. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, wonderful. We're so lucky to have you here. Margaret is an expert in thesis by publication. She's written so much literature on this, and so we're so pleased and happy to have you here. We also have Dr. Julie Arnold. There's Julie and Dr. Deb Munro. I'm not sure. Oh, there's Deb. Excellent. Just pin you. Okay, great. So Deb's here as well. We have Harry Goswami, who's an HDR team leader with the Faculty of Science, actually at the GRC. Catherine Radbourne, thanks for being here, Catherine. She's the research support librarian at our library. And also Cameron Rutter, who's our university copyright officer. Wow, aren't we lucky to have all these wonderful people here to support me and giving you lots of information about thesis by publication. So I'll just go back one slide. This is what I plan to do today. So I'm going to start by just looking at the types of theses that we have at QUT. We quickly look at the expectations document that is a mandatory document. And it's really important in this time when you're doing a thesis by publication, especially. We'll go through some guidelines that we have at QUT, and then I'll bring in some speakers to give their input on the benefits and challenges of thesis by publication. We'll jump over to Cameron and Catherine to talk about their perspectives, and then we'll look at the structure. And this is where I'll bring Margaret in as well, because she's the expert, how to structure your thesis by publication, because there's so many options. We'll look at authorship as well. I'm the language educator in the team, so I want to talk to you about why it's so important to maintain that coherence in your document. Obviously, even in a monograph, any writing that you do, you need to have a coherent document, but especially, I think, in a thesis by publication. We'll quickly have a look at what examiners think, because ultimately they're the people we want to impress. I have a short video of former students as well. If we have an opportunity, we'll have a listen to that. And we're here at the end for questions. If you do have a burning question, put it into the chat and we'll hold on to that and keep it until the end, unless there's someone on the panel who's able to answer that as well. All right. So Julie actually has to leave us soon. So I'm going to just quickly ask Julie to give us her feelings about Julie's done a thesis by publication, and just tell us, Julie, what do you think? Was it worth it? Oh, you're on mute.
Again, well done. Thank you, Tash, and thanks for putting this day together. I really appreciate it. Is there an echo? No. Thank you for putting together today. And I'm sorry I can't hang around. I really do like to stay for all of these sessions, and I do keep closely in touch with the work that Tasha is doing, because I think it is important work at the university. For me, the thesis by publication has absolutely been worth it. But I will point you in the direction of Deb, who's going to talk a little bit more about that journey through the thesis by publication and the benefits and challenges that might go with that. What I would suggest, though, is that it's a decision to take really seriously. It is not the decision that everyone should make or needs to make, but I congratulate you all for being here and giving that decision your really close attention. The other thing I did want to say to you before I left, though, was to point you in the direction of a couple of pieces of information that were extraordinarily helpful to me. One of them is Margaret's work herself, so you're going to get plenty of access to that here. For me, Margaret's, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Margaret, first piece, which was about integrating your publications into your thesis document, was important for me to start to get my head around the process. But perhaps more importantly for you all now is the development of that work, and also the influence that Margaret's voice has had in QUT taking the thesis by publication really seriously, in terms of coming back again and again to the requirements that we have here. And so you'll notice as you go along that the way we're talking about the thesis by publication is a dynamic process. And so it's really important that you keep in touch with what your supervisors and with what your school or faculty is asking you to do. The other important source of information for me is a book that no doubt Tasha will refer to, by Nygard and Soley, and I can't remember the title of it. Help me out, Tasha. It doesn't matter. Nygard and Soley have produced a really fantastic book, which Tasha will refer to, and I can't commend that book strongly enough to you. The reason it's a great second voice, apart from the fact that it's just super practical, is that they come from a Scandinavian tradition where everybody is basically doing their thesis documents in this way. So that perspective is super useful. That's all I want to say. I'm off to some professional learning myself today by the wonderful David Silverman, who's helping me maybe unpick some of the bad habits that I managed to get for myself in my data analysis, and really challenging my thinking going forward. Have a great day, everyone, and I will see you in the thesis by publication soup.
Thanks, Julie. Excellent. So what I thought we would do to start with is tell me why you're here in the chat. Are you deciding whether you want to do thesis by publication? Are you in the middle of it right now? Tell me exactly what has brought you to this workshop, so we have an idea about the attendees, and that will help us, I guess. So while you're doing that, I'm going to just quickly talk to you about the types of theses that we have at QUT. So QUT offers 3 presentation options, which are monograph, thesis by publication, and thesis by creative works. Obviously, we're going to be talking a lot about thesis by publication, but I thought that I would just mention that traditionally the PhD or Masters by Research thesis resembled a book, which was known as the monograph, and it's that scholarly piece of writing on a specific single subject or an aspect of a specific subject. And in fact, just out of curiosity, the word is derived from the Greek word mono, which means single, and grapho, which means to write. As we know, it's usually comprised of a set of cohesive chapters, but also we offer the thesis by publication, which is very popular in STEM, but is becoming increasingly popular in the humanities. And that's why Marilyn is here. Marilyn's in the faculty of Siege in education, and Deb as well is also has just graduated with a thesis by publication, also in the faculty of education. So on this page, I've got links to all of the guidelines for monograph for publication and creative works, just so it's easy access for you. And I will be sending out these slides and the recording after the session. All right, let me just have a quick look what we have here. Understanding the structure, doing a thesis by publication, considering it, deciding what to do. Okay, great. Great. So there's some people who are still deciding, and we will be looking at both benefits and drawbacks today. So at QUT, we have a structure, and this table actually shows it compares the different types of theses, and it shows what's common and what's different between the monograph and the thesis by publication. As you can see here, we've got most things in the top part are similar. The literature review, I just want to tell you, can either be part of the thesis, or in fact, it can be a publication unto itself. You can have a scoping lit review, a systematic lit review that stands alone as a paper. Generally, the guidelines will say generally we would expect a lit review to be within the thesis, but it doesn't matter if it's a publication as long as you have a lit review is the point. I also am attaching some guidelines for examiners, and I think it's so important to remember to know actually what it is the examiners are looking for. So I'm just going to actually put that into the chat for you. But again, you will get these slides later. And I've highlighted point number 1. So on the left, we have the PhD, and on the right, we have the master's. True to both of them, and in point number 1, which you can see here, is that the main purpose of graduate research at QUT, and indeed other universities around Australia and the world, is to encourage independence and originality of thought in the quest for new knowledge. So regardless of how you present your thesis, a monograph, or by publication, this is point number 1, and it's your key goal. Point number 4, and I've just outlined that as well, is that you need to have a coherence of argument and presentation, which can, it's really important to remember that as well when you are choosing thesis by publication. So what is it? What is a thesis by publication? There's actually no clear definition across countries, across fields, and in actual fact, it wasn't long where QUT used multiple names as well. So sometimes across institutions, there's no clear definition, no clear title. It comes in various forms and has a range of names, as you can see all these names here. So I'm going to bring Margaret in here now, because this is basically your words, Margaret. Margaret has published extensively with Shannon Mason. And tell us, Margaret, what is it? What is a thesis by publication?
Sure. So again, I just want to echo those props to Shannon Mason, because I work with her really substantially, and she's made a massive intellectual property contribution to this area and is an absolute powerhouse, and also did her own PhD thesis by publication, which is what I've done as well. But I really want to bring her in here and celebrate the Shannon Mason awesomeness, and encourage you to also look up the work that she's done, both with me but also independently. So when it comes to what a thesis by publication is, you're going to be really strongly guided by individual institutional policies, and it looks like what you've got here at QUT is really well thought out. There's a lot of consideration around allowing you flexibility. So you'll be able to work with your supervisor in order to come up with a PhD, which is a thesis by publication that's going to work for you around your resourcing constraints and your time commitment. One of the key concerns when people are thinking about jumping into a thesis by publication is, oh, will this take me my entire lifespan to complete? Will I still have a family at the end of this? because of the extent of the commitment. It is obviously really hard work, but when it comes to the thesis by publication, you're looking at a work that's going to incorporate some published works. It might also incorporate some accepted works, and it might also even incorporate some under review works. The exact portions of those are sometimes specifically defined by the university and other times left quite comfortably ambiguous so that you can work with your supervisory team in order to decide, yeah, is this going to be enough rigor in terms of passing it off as a thesis by publication? And as long as your policy has flexibility, it's usually fine. So the main point is, with the thesis by publication, is that cohesion, which is one thing that Natasha's done an excellent job of really emphasizing. We want to be able to, from an examiner perspective, get your publication and see, yes, this is responsive to a set of related but distinct research questions. So we can see how all of these papers work together, but also merited being individual publications. So it's not an issue of duplicative publication or salami slicing, where the same thing has been published over and over again without much change, or salami slicing where something that belonged together has been artificially separated. So there's a lot to consider in your supervisory team around thesis by publication, which is why when you're pinning down what it means for you, you've got to have those early in-depth discussions with your supervisory team.
Perfect. Is it anyone else wants to jump in yet? We'll just keep going. Please feel free to jump in. Okay, so at QUT, and I'm sure in most universities, we encourage students to make the decision early. We will talk about how also at the end, if you've been planning to do thesis by publication the entire time, and then it comes to the point at the very end where you don't think you're going to make deadlines, you can revert back to a monograph. But we do encourage, if you are wanting to do that, it's a conversation that you need to have with your supervisory team right at the start, right at stage 2, and certainly before confirmation. So I've just got a little excerpt here which are taken from the guidelines. So just keep that in mind and make sure you have that discussion with your supervisory team. So why do people do it? Why do people do a thesis by publication? I'm just going to point out some of the literature again, mostly done by Margaret and others. There is a term that you may have heard, publish or perish. A little history. It was actually a term coined in 1942, so it's quite old, and it describes the pressure to publish academic in order to succeed. It's a little scary to think that that still exists today. But it has received lots of criticism, this catchphrase, because it encourages a culture of quantity over quality. But even despite that, it is thesis by publication is growing in popularity. And as I mentioned, it's not just in the STEM fields, but it's also in social sciences. The research outputs are seen as an indicator of research excellence, which in turn means individual success for the students. Publishing during candidature is common in STEM and medicine, but yes, as I said, we are adopting it more in the social sciences. I actually have met a couple of supervisors at QUT in STEM who have admitted to me that they actually will not take on a student unless they're doing a thesis by publication, because I guess because of the effort and also the publication implications for the supervisors as well. Okay, so I'll keep going to the QUT expectation document. So at QUT, we have a document that you may all be familiar with. It's the expectations document. It's a mandatory document. I'm going to get to that. But the reason that I want to show that to you is it's important to share understandings about supervision and reach an agreement over fundamental expectations and responsibilities with your supervisors early on in candidature, especially if you're doing a thesis by publication. You do that because you're laying the foundations of that effective working relationship. So lots of information and clickable links once you get these slides. Also, just a reminder that at QUT, there's a student code of conduct. It's aligned with the Australian Code of Conduct for Responsible Conduct of Research. Again, I've put all clickable links to those codes here. And this is the document that I'm talking about. If you haven't done it, it's mandatory for all commencing students. I think it's been mandatory for about, I don't know, Harry, do you know the answer to that? Has it been a year or 6 months that this has been mandatory? There we go.
Yeah, it's been a year or so.
Yeah. So I've actually there's a clickable link to this document, and I have taken a screenshot of what the document consists of. So basically they're looking at topics, key areas like meetings, locations, reporting attendance, feedback, confidentiality, conflicts of interest, publications. And obviously this is an important conversation, and it's sometimes actually difficult to casually bring up in a meeting with your supervisor. So using this document as a crutch really to have that conversation can be really helpful for students as well. So please, if you haven't looked at this document, if you're in your second or third year and you haven't looked at this document, it's completely fine to say to your supervisors, hey, I was at a workshop with Tasha and she suggested that we look at this document, and tell them that I suggested that you regularly go back and look at the document as well, because these conversations, sometimes they're hard amongst academics, and they're certainly hard when there's that power imbalance as well between student and supervisor. I also have a clickable link to our candidate management system, which again, it's been around for a while now. I think it's August 2022. So if you forget where that is, there's a clickable link here. It's got lots of access for you. I think the only thing that you can't do on this is withdraw. That's the only thing that you can't do with the CMS. And while I have you, I just wanted to point out, and I use this slide for my supervisor workshops as well, because sometimes supervisors don't know the difference between the digital workplace and HiQ. So the digital workplace is only accessible to students who have staff access. So if your supervisors are sending you links and you can't open them on the digital workplace because you're just a student, that's the reason why. So you can explain that to them, and also you know that as well. All right, so the next part, I'm going to refer to you, please, Harry, so you can keep yourself unmuted. We're just going to go through the guidelines at QUT and how it works here. So there's a link to the Thesis by Publication guidelines. Actually, I think I'll just quickly put that into the chat as well.
I can do that. It's okay. You already got it.
Oh, I'm done. I'm fast. Okay, so I think the guidelines talk about minimum number of papers required, the platform where you can submit your papers, whether that be a journal, a book chapter, or a conference paper. Also the importance of rankings of journals and conferences, because that comes into play as well when you're doing thesis by publication. It gives information about whether the papers have to be accepted or reviewed or published at the time of your thesis submission, and also the format and structure of the overall thesis, including appendices as well, which is it's important for all students, regardless of monograph or not. Get your formatting on track right from the get-go, all throughout candidature. It can be something that students struggle with at the end, but there's really important guidelines for thesis by publication students as well. And there's also information on, as we mentioned, the importance of discussing authorship and contributions made by authors. So this is just a snapshot from those guidelines. Harry, maybe I'll bring you in here and you can just talk to this particular table, which is at the bottom. Actually, if you scroll all the way down through the guidelines, you'll find this table.
Yeah, sure. So look, each faculty treats this individually. So you have to be very careful whether you're from CISJ or science or engineering, because each faculty has developed their guidelines and what they are expecting from their student when they choose to do thesis by publication. And familiarize yourself with these guidelines. It will give you a brief snapshot. But the most important part is that when you actually start your candidature, you should be discussing these options with your supervisory team because they are the actual experts in your area. So when it comes down to guiding you in terms of choosing which sort of thesis would you like to do, it could be monograph or creative writing or publication. And when it comes down to publication, each faculty has guidelines around what quality of publication they're going to expect when you are choosing to publish your thesis by publication. In MPhil, there is a minimum requirement of one published journal article, and in PhD, there is a minimum of three publication required. Some faculty, they don't allow Masters of Philosophy student to choose thesis by publication, so you have to check that as well. All this information is available online for yourself. And if there is a question, and if you have any further question, there is an alternative that you can go to your academic lead of your particular school because they can guide you around why something is allowed and why something is not allowed.
Great. Thanks, Harry. What I've done here on the slide, so I've got the whole table, and then there's variations. So you can see here for table 2 at the bottom, business and law, there's no variations to the main guides, and the same with creative industries. But engineering, health, and science do have variations, and I've on the next slides I've put those clickable links for you. And the MPhil in table 1, as Harry just mentioned, business and law and Siege, they do not permit, and health do not permit Masters by Research students to submit in this format. And I actually had an experience once where a student was coming to me and was showing me her document, and her supervisor, it was a health supervisor, did not know that the MPhil student wasn't able to do that. There's a question in the chat about why don't they? As Harry said, you need to go to the faculty and ask them and talk to them. We don't actually make the rules as to why. Yep. Yeah, Harry, is there something you want to add to that?
I think it depends on your school as well. Because I'm a part of Faculty of Science, so I can't individually comment on why it's not allowed in Faculty of Health. But best to reach out to your academic lead of your school or even your supervisory team that why you are not allowed as an MPhil student to choose thesis by publication, because this sort of decisions been done by the faculty level, so it's not our decision as a GRC or GRE+D.
That's right. And I think the important thing I want to stress today is sometimes your supervisors are not aware as well. And I often say in my workshops as a language and learning educator, don't forget, this is your candidature. You're driving the whole process. So you need to arm yourself with information as well, and maybe share it with your supervisors, because I had a very angry supervisor say to me, "What do you mean we can't present it?" So yeah, it's important that you go and seek out the answers as well. All right, excellent. Thank you so much. So I'm going to then, and thank you, Harry. I'm going to now ask Marilyn and Deb to help with the next part. So I just want to get your perspective, Marilyn, as a professor and someone who supports students a lot. And then Deb, your very recent experience of finishing a thesis by publication. Just tell us, we're going to go into the benefits and challenges, and I'll show those slides as well. But Marilyn, maybe we'll start with you. What's your perspective? Do you think it's worth it? Just keep in mind you're on mute.
It depends virtually, first of all, on the topic. As you said, as Margaret said, you can't take a cohesive topic and try and artificially chop it up into little bits just to make it a publication. What you've got to be able to do at the start is to devise a thesis that falls naturally into 3 different papers or 3 different parts or 3 different studies, so that you can actually do a thesis that is integral and has integrity for that thesis. The second part is the student capable of being a good writer? And some students find it very difficult to express themselves academically. And because you have to have at least 1 paper published, you've got to do that fairly early in your candidature because of the difficulty of getting something published. It needs to be submitted to a journal, a high-quality journal. It needs to be reviewed. It probably needs to be revised and then submitted. So if you're not a strong writer, then it's probably better not to do a thesis by publication, because then you have your whole time in being able to polish your writing so that it's really good by the end. But if you're doing a thesis by publication, you've got to be able to write quite well in the beginning. I think it's totally worth it. If you want to go into academia, it is absolutely and totally worth it. I did actually 7 papers for my thesis, but there was no thesis by publication last century. So I actually had to turn them all into a monograph, which took me another year part-time to do. I think for me as a teacher, why would I be wanting somebody to teach somebody to do a thesis, which is the last thesis that they're ever going to do? Whereas if I teach somebody to be able to write a good paper, then that is going to last them through their career, whether they become an academic or not. So for me, it's not for everybody, but it's totally worth it.
Thank you, Marilyn. Deb, what do you think? Was it worth it?
The answer to that would have depended on the day you asked me, but I would say yes, it was, and I agree very much with all of the points that Marilyn and Margaret have made. I think in the beginning, that relationship with your supervisor is so important, and they're so experienced, and it's good to have those really good conversations with them and listen to their perspective. Marilyn said it's going to depend on the type of writer you are, and your supervisor is someone who's going to be a good judge of looking at your writing and making those recommendations. I think one of the things, you do need to keep that very big picture perspective if you're writing articles of how is this telling a coherent story altogether, and that can be a bit of a tricky thing to do because you can get a little bit bogged down in the detail of each article and very focused on each article, and you need to be able to keep that thread running between them all so that you are telling that coherent story. And Marilyn talked about needing to be able to get a publication in, and then the approval process can take quite a long time. I found that very stressful because to get your thesis by publication, you need to have at least 1 published. And the one that I submitted was under review for a year. So it was 12 months, and I was getting very, very stressed that one had taken so long. And I thought, if I try to get another one, is that one going to take? So the time that the peer review pressure, the peer review process is under a lot of pressure, and it just takes a very long time sometimes. So there's a lot to consider, and I think having that big conversation with your supervisor at the beginning and really feeling like you understand what's coming if you choose to go that way is a good starting point. Make sure you have a very good understanding of what it's going to look like.
And in fact, Deb and Marilyn, you might speak to this as well. You may have the conversation and be committed to thesis by publication and go along to confirmation, and then your panel may suggest that you don't do thesis by publication.
Then that's only a suggestion. I would say, Tasha, that's totally up to the supervisory team to consider that with the student, but ultimately it's the student and the supervisory team that take on suggestions by the panel.
I'm so pleased to hear you say that, Marilyn. Marilyn and I have had a couple of students come to us, and I've referred them to Marilyn for advice, because ultimately, please remember, if you do have this happen, it is still a decision and a discussion that needs to take place with the supervisory team. What I'll do now is I've got a slide of benefits and a slide of drawbacks. So I'll introduce them. But jump in, Deb, Marilyn, Margaret, feel free to jump in at this point. So this is actually taken from Margaret and Shannon's book. Which is the book? I think this one was in 2020. What do I even call this? That's the name of the book. So the benefits here, to begin with, the thesis by publication has been known to motivate students. You have immediate goals. You have a goal to submit a paper. It's a 10,000 word document rather than a daunting 100,000 word document. So that's one of the motivations. Jump in when you want to. Another benefit is the fact that, and Marilyn suggested that in a thesis by publication, your research is being published before you finish your degree. So you're building that researcher profile throughout candidature. You're building a track record of your publications and a profile if you stay in academia. And even if you don't, if you head out to industry, it can directly impact on your career. Something else is the transferable skills that you're learning along the way. You know, as HDR students, you're going to hear this a lot. The importance of building transferable skills that will help you beyond candidature. Things like writing skills, editing, dealing with publishers, dealing with editors, dealing with critical feedback, which segues to the next point. And also there's the benefit of networking. After you publish an article, you might meet, the authors that you were reading. You may have a chance to collaborate with them as well. And your research is actually reaching a wide audience of people with common interests to you. You can build relationships, and there may be potential for co-authoring in the future. You're also disseminating your research, which is important, especially in particular fields like computer science, for example, where things change rapidly.
Can I jump in on disseminating research? Because this was one that it was the real game changer for me. Doing it by thesis by publication, if you're sitting here and thinking, I've chosen this PhD topic because it's something that I'm really passionate about and I need it to lead to real world change. You've got stakeholders in mind that you want it to connect with. You're imagining how the research you're doing is actually going to change things in the real world. If that's you, thesis by publication is definitely a better way to go, because you'll get that dissemination of research. And what you do then is you use those credible peer-reviewed publications as a platform for knowledge mobilization, and you start speaking to media, and you start creating plain English pieces through outlets such as The Conversation. And that's when you start to see this research you've done at PhD level actually lead to that real world change that you're hoping to see. You don't need to wait until the end of your PhD for that to happen, as long as you've had solid supervisory guidance around the quality of your work as you go. You can get that happening. I did my first newspaper and radio interviews, I think, in my second year of doctoral candidature, and it opened up a whole new world around knowledge mobilization.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I might get Catherine and Cameron to talk about the conversation as well. Is that something that you guys, it's run with you guys, Catherine, at the library? Don't you have workshops on that? You're on mute.
Sorry, could you ask me the question again?
I've been to workshops on the conversation and how to publish. I'm not sure, is that done with your team?
We do sometimes organise workshops with publishers on like such as Sage or Springer Nature or Wiley on how best to sort of, I guess it's sort of focusing on taking advantage of the read and publish agreements that we have with those publishers, but it is also general advice as well about getting published in different journals and things like that. Yeah, we do, but we have writing, not writing, publishing from your thesis and which journal, like which journal to
Brilliant.
select. So yeah, there are a few different sessions that we have about getting published.
There are publications for the conversation, writing blogs and writing pieces for the conversation, Tasha.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether they're from the library, but I know in our faculty we often provide those. We also have the opportunity to have people from the conversation come and give us webinars as well.
Yeah, that's great. Because I've been to a couple in Kelvin Grove campus in E Block. All right, well, keep going. The last couple of benefits is the fact that it's efficient to publish your results as well during candidature. And actually, I see so many students who, if they've done a monograph, they struggle. In fact, I was talking to one yesterday who was saying, I've just finished, I haven't published anything, I'm so tired, I don't have the motivation to actually take something now and publish it that I finished. So that's something to consider as well. Lastly, in a thesis by publication, when your papers are published already, many students also feel that the examination process has been expedited. Your publications have been subjected already to a critique. So the examination process may be more straightforward. But I do want to clarify that being published does not mean that you will automatically be conferred. I think most often it does happen, but there are situations where examiners have actually given negative and even harsh critiques on papers that have already been published. But the positive is the fact that you've already gone through a type of examination process with your publications. So that's just something to point out. And so I'm going to now look at the challenges. And I was chatting to Deb earlier this week, and she actually said, oh, and this one, and this one. So Deb, do you want to go through the list here? Are you happy to go through the list?
Sure. So as I've already mentioned, the publication process, just the timeline of it can be quite challenging. You can wait a really long time, and we got to the point where we were contacting the journal politely saying, hello. So it can just be very, as I've said, very stressful. Getting that feedback, you can kind of be in a bit of a holding pattern, unsure of whether should I try and pull it from that one and try to submit to another one. You're waiting for feedback to see the direction that you should be taking it in. Margaret and Marilyn have both discussed this, the need for a coherent thesis, and that is very important. And I said before, I feel like I got a little bit lost sometimes in the actual paper that I was working on, and didn't step back enough to look at how it was all connecting together. The next one, this was the bane of my life, restricted word limits. I struggle with word limits all of the time, and journals have very, very tight word limits. There was one journal I submitted an article to that had an 8,000 word limit, and my first pass at the article was over 19,000 words, which was just completely ridiculous. So I have learned a lot about restricting my word limits, but it can be quite challenging. I struggled a lot with that. Also, just the repetition of because I had the one participant group, trying not to self-plagiarize or repeat throughout journal articles where I'm talking about, well, this is the ethics process that I went through, and this is how I recruited, and trying to find different ways of saying the same thing essentially can be a little bit tricky. The time pressures of it, I think towards the end, you know, when you're waiting to see if something's published and your timeline's coming close for when you'd like to submit your PhD, that was probably the most stressful time for me. And I remember the day that I got it accepted and it was going to be published, I actually shook. I was in my staff room and I was speaking to another staff member, and she said, "Are you okay? You're shaking." And it was actually shaking from relief that it had been accepted. So it was a bit stressful. And yeah, the emotional challenges of it, of having feedback come anyway from your supervisors, who I think when you get to this level, you generally feel like you're perhaps quite a good writer. And then you start submitting things to your supervisors and it comes back covered in pen and covered in suggestions, and that, you know that they mean well and they're helping you become a better writer, but that can be a little bit difficult. And then you get the feedback that comes from the peer reviewers, which is often not couched in the kind terms that your supervisors use, so that can be quite emotionally challenging as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Up to you, Margaret.
So just around some of the, yeah, that was like so insightful, Debbie, getting that from your lived perspective. And those emotional challenges you mentioned really resonated with me. Just to give you some insight behind this paper that we wrote around the challenges of thesis by publication, some of these managing the publication process and some of these kind of aspects around delayed feedback weren't from the journals, it was from the supervisory team. So this is where, if you want to do a thesis by publication, you need to make sure you establish those open lines of communication with your supervisory team. And if they are relatively new to supervising a thesis by publication, you will have to literally sit them down and say, look, this is what we're going to need to do. When I put out a paper, I'm going to be putting out papers here, 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 and here approximately on my timeline that I've written up for my PhD or master's journey. So that means that if you are co-authoring the paper or you're providing feedback on the paper, I'm going to need to have feedback here, 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 and here, so that they can see and adjust their own scheduling accordingly across all their other students and commitments to make sure they give you the feedback you need to continue to progress in a timely manner. Because I'll be honest, out here in the real world, when I speak to students who have tried a thesis by publication and they have failed to complete by that mode, anecdotally, almost every single time, it's not because of the journals, even though they can be an absolute hectic mess, as covered by Debbie. It is very, very often because supervisors are not giving the students the feedback they need to progress in a timely manner, which leaves the student, because of the power imbalance, sitting there twiddling their thumbs thinking, well, actually, I really need you to green flag this so I can submit it. I'm sitting here doing nothing, waiting for your advice. So if you want to do it by this model, you're going to have to kind of take a bit of a minute and sit with that idea and think about, all right, what will I need to be doing in terms of managing this project, managing my communication with my supervisory team, and making those expectations really clear, because there's a lot for them to gain if, you know, they're contributing to this kind of research journey, but they will actually need to tangibly contribute at key points that have been plotted out across that journey.
Yeah, so good. So many great points there. I think number one, I love that you used the real world. Thanks for that plug for QUT, Margaret. You used the term in the real world. And also, Margaret stressing, you are driving this. I often use the term feedback agent. You are the feedback agent as well. And just also an indicator for everyone here today. I mirror this workshop and I do it for supervisors. The first time I delivered this workshop to supervisors, I had 180 supervisors register at QUT. They don't know a lot. And so again, it's really up to you to, as Margaret suggested, to inform them and let them know. All right, we're going to keep going. I'm going to please ask Catherine to come in now. So it'll be Catherine and Cameron. And just this slide just reminds you, the QUT library are incredible. They have so much knowledge and support available to you. Please make use of them. So I'm going to introduce Catherine Radbourne. She's the Research Support Librarian. And over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Tasha. Hello, everyone. Yes, so the first thing that first contact probably that you will have with the library is when if you haven't already done IFN 006 or was IFN 001, but I think that's finished now. And that is advanced information retrieval research skills. So that's about helping you navigate the different research systems that are available, like the databases and things like that, that you will need for doing your research. So your liaison librarians, they deliver that in conjunction with the research skills coordinator, Lyndall Gunton, and her little team. But yes, so they have designed the course, and it is mandatory to do. So hopefully you've all done it. Please reach out to your liaison librarian, because it will help you to do the course. It will help you to do the assignment. It will help you to do the assessment, I should say. Make good use of your liaison librarians. They are there to help you. You don't have to do this on your own, even if you've been working for a long time or studying for a long time. You will learn something new and fresh that you didn't know before. I can guarantee that.
In fact, you should be buying them all a coffee, Catherine, shouldn't you? And making them your best friend throughout
Exactly.
candidature.
Exactly. So there's lots of resources as well that the liaison librarians can point you to, and they can answer your questions. They're your first point of call when it comes to engaging with the library. Make good use of them. That's what they're there for. The other thing that they can help you to find, but you can also find this yourself, is exemplars, previous examples of thesis by publication. We have all of these or in our institutional repository, QUT ePrints, and you can find them in there. You can do the thesis search. You can see the button there on the screen. You can search by faculty, you can search by the type of publication. And it's a great idea to see what are the really good ones, what are the not so good ones, maybe. Get some ideas for what you can do with your own thesis by publication. So yeah, please do make use of this. And if you do have trouble navigating it, get in touch with your liaison librarian who'll be able to help you with that. Also, one of the services, I did mention this earlier, that we do where to publish and what to consider. And that's about choosing the right journal to publish in, or choosing conferences to publish. So there are two resources that you can use. These are not the Think, Check, Submit and Think, Check, Attend. They're not created by QUT, but we will refer you to them because they're really good resources for helping to decide if a journal is a good quality journal to publish in. The journal rank can be a good indicator, but it's not the only thing that you should be considering when you're looking at publishing. Other things the main thing that you need to consider is, does this journal, does my research fit the aims and scope of this particular journal? And if it doesn't, then pick again. There's not a lot of point in preparing, because like every journal will have its own set of submission details, like for formatting and referencing and all of those sorts of things, word limit. So if you're going to take the time to submit to a journal, then you need to make sure that it is going to be considered and not just rejected at the first hurdle, because it doesn't your research doesn't fit the aims and scope of what they actually publish. So yeah, the quality of the journal, as I mentioned, using Think Check Submit, they'll help you to avoid those predatory or publishers that you might have heard of, and that you will, in time, if you haven't already received, you may have received emails from suspect journals saying, "We'd like to invite you to publish in our journal." Sometimes they are not good quality journals, so you also need to be careful about those. And again, if you've got issues, if you've got questions around the suitability of a journal, or if you've got received an email, talk to your liaison librarian, because they can help you use some of the tools to decide on whether or not this is a credible resource, a credible journal to publish in. Because you will in your career perhaps get emails from different journals saying, we're putting a special edition together and we'd like to invite you to publish, but it's those sorts of ones that you investigate, and some of them are really good and some of them are not so good. So yeah. If you're wanting to publish your research open access, there are a few tools that you can use. So the Directory of Open Access Journals, all of the journals that are in there have been validated as genuine open access journals. They're not predatory or deceptive in nature. The ones that have a DOAJ seal, that means they've gone through more rigorous checks to get that tick as well. And you can customize your search within DOAJ to say that I only want to see open access journals that have this seal. You can also, in DOAJ, you can also select journals that don't charge you an article processing charge or an APC, and they may be the sort of journals that you want to publish in as well. We also have at QUT read and publish agreements. Now, what this means is, so QUT pays the publishers a fee to get read access to a lot of the journals that they publish. In some instances, we don't have to pay any additional fee, but in most cases, we have to pay a small increase on top of the read fee to get the published component, and then that allows our authors to publish their research and reviews open access for no additional charge to them. And you can, again, if you've got questions about the read and publish agreements, you can contact your liaison librarian. And if they don't know the answer, then they'll probably contact me, because that's the service that I facilitate, is the read and publish agreements. We do also have some faculties currently will pay an AP up to 4,000 Australian dollars for an APC in the journals that are in the top 10% of their subject category in some of the journal ranking tools that are available. So that's also another option that's available to you. But yes, publishing open access is really good for your research because it makes it more visible, and being more visible means that it can be used because it's free to read, so it can be used and accessed by people in developing countries, people in government, people in other countries that don't have subscriptions to those particular journals. So it can open up doors for collaboration and citations, and not the citations are the be all and end all, but obviously it does mean that your researchers can sometimes be having more of an impact. But yeah, there are a whole lot of other, no one metric can ever tell you the whole picture of your research anyway. I'm digressing.
No, thank you, Catherine. That's awesome.
That's
thank you. So you heard it from Catherine's mouth. You can contact her directly for information on that. All right, I'm going to bring, thank you, Catherine, for
That's
your
my pleasure.
input. So we're going to bring Cameron in now, and Cameron's going to talk to you about publishing from your thesis.
Excellent. Thanks, Sasha. And yeah, thanks, Catherine, as well. So I'm just going to quickly just touch on some of the publishers' policies around publishing from your thesis. So looking at obviously, if you're doing thesis by publication, which is why you're here, you'll be you'll be submitting to journals prior to the final submission of your thesis. But there might be some folk here as well that are doing thesis by monograph that might be wanting to publish from their thesis after they've submitted it. So here's just some quick tips and some general guidance. So you might be wondering, if you can include these articles, the published articles, in the final version of your thesis. So your final version, as you may or may not be aware, does get published via QTE prints. So it'll be made open access via QTE prints. So that's a standard process across universities across the world. So because of this, most publishers, yes, they do allow authors to include their articles as a chapter in their thesis, provided that the source is acknowledged. And there are a few that require permission. So Springer Nature, for example, but there's a great list here which is curated by Caltech University in the States, and they've actually got a list of publisher policies on there, and so they've done some of the work for you, which is excellent. But you can sort of see from that list, there's major publishers there, and they all essentially allow it without requiring permission. And what I'm talking about here are publishers, if you're publishing non-open access. If you've got an open access article, you can include that in your thesis. The licenses that you'd probably most likely be applying to your article, the Creative Commons licenses, are generally compatible with the license that we apply to the published version of your thesis. Yeah, so moving on from that, there's a couple of other things to consider. So, for example, what would you do if an article was under review at the time your thesis was submitted and then rejected by a journal? So, say even if it's not rejected, if it's under review, as was acknowledged earlier, it can take quite a while for something from submission to publishing to actually happen. So you may not. If things don't line up right, you might have a case where something's submitted that you're then submitted to a journal and it's under review, but with the timing of your thesis submission, it's not actually accepted and published yet. So there are ways to manage that. So you obviously have a talk to your supervisory team because they will advise you best there about what they would like, but you can mark it as under review. And also, if you're looking at post thesis submission, most publishers and articles and publishers do allow you to publish articles based on your thesis, but you must notify the journal if it's based on your thesis. Cite the thesis as you would any other publication, so you're citing yourself. And failure to do this could really have bad effects because you could get rejected, and it might then show up as a really high score for similarity and authenticate, so it would look like plagiarism. So you really need to cite your thesis as the work that you're drawing on.
Sorry.
You're right. Next slide. And as with everything, just really have a look at the publisher's policies before submitting. And as Catherine suggested, it's the part of that think, check, submit. So looking at publisher policies is really important. Some publishers may require an embargo. So that's what happens if you publish with the publisher, with a journal, and they might actually request that article be essentially sort of redacted from the thesis for, say, 12 months, etc. So that's totally doable. I'll obviously have a chat with your supervisory team, but in terms of like the technical process, you can do that, and our ePrints team can manage that as well. So if once that embargo period is over, a new version of your thesis can be uploaded to ePrints, so the full version is there. So that was just a quick overview of the publisher policies. If you have questions, though, like Catherine outlined really do get in touch with your liaison librarian. You can also reach out to us in the Office for Scholarly Communications. You can reach out to me as well, the copyright officer. Lastly, I just wanted to plug that I do run a workshop on copyright and your thesis, because when you're using third-party materials in your thesis, so for example, if you're using figures, images, or even long quotes, it's integral and important to consider copyright, and you do have to complete a copyright compliance table when you submit your thesis, your final version of your thesis, if you have included in any other people's materials in your work. And you do have to get permissions and manage permissions, but I also talk about managing your own copyright, and a lot of that is around talking about publishing. So please get along to one of these workshops. There's one in November, so they're really good to get along to. And the earlier you start to think about this, the easier, because the last thing you want is like right at the end when you submit that you've got to try and figure some of this out. So thanks very much. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And we've got one last slide. Catherine, do you want me to talk to this while I'm on the roll? Cool. So a whole bunch of useful websites. They're all here. The two main ones I just wanted to point out was we've got a copyright guide, plugging that because I'm a copyright officer. That guide's relatively quite comprehensive. So if you've got if you want to know more, have a look at the copyright guide, but you can reach out to myself as the copyright officer. Also, Research Data Finder is our repository for research data, as the title suggests. I highly recommend having a look on Research Data Finder just to look at published data sets, and you'll find out and learn more about research data throughout your degree. And we also have a research data librarian who can give you some advice and guidance around your data as well. So thanks very much.
Just to on that Research Data Finder as well, you can publish a lot of the open access journals will have a requirement that you publish your data with the article. So what you can do is deposit your data into, if it can be made open access, you can deposit it in Research Data Finder, and you can get a DOI, a digital object identifier, and that makes it easier to cite and reuse. And then you just cite the DOI for your data, and that also complies with any open access funding requirements or publisher requirements to make the data openly accessible. So again, Research Data Librarian can advise you on that as well. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Cameron and Catherine again. I mean, it really just does go to show you that it takes a village, and we are your village. All right, so we're going to bring Margaret back into the conversation, and hopefully we can help answer Chris's question about including the paper in the thesis, how to do that, how to structure it. So, Margaret, I've got a couple of slides, and we're going to then show pictures from your book, the actual sandwich models, for example. But yeah, talk to us about why structuring the thesis and why considering and planning that at the start is so important.
Sure. So when it comes to the structure of the thesis, we've got that paper that you're about to see the slides from that Natasha will take us through, that will show you that you have so many options, and you don't even need to go with any of the options that we're going to show you. There are just some potential models that you might want to draw on. The main thing for you to be doing with your supervisors is sitting down and thinking about how are we going to pull this together so that we can tell that coherent story, so that examiners will be looking at the research questions and thinking, look how these papers have reflected back on the research questions and answered these research questions with considerable substance. As I mentioned earlier, and if you're not already across duplicative publication and salami slicing, you really need to look into both of those terms and understand their implications around ethics and publication, because at the outset, when you're having these discussions with your supervisory team about doing a thesis by publication, as Marilyn so excellently pointed out earlier, there are implications for design that need to be acknowledged really early on. Trying to take one research question, sometimes one research question might be so complex and nuanced that it does warrant 4 journal articles all to address the single research question without it being an instance of salami slicing or duplicative publication. However, in other cases, you will actually get desk rejected by an editor who's familiar with your previous work that you've already published and raises a red flag with you saying, this looks and sounds an awful lot like the paper you had come out 2 months ago. Can you assure me that this is different data or a different analysis or something similar? So, you know, you can't expect to be able to publish the same findings written slightly differently in another work, whether it be a book chapter or a translated work or however you want to pass it off, because it's not an ethical practice and you run the risk, even if it's not flagged at the time, of it coming back to bite you down the track. So the best thing is to get across this understanding of what ethical practices in publication are, and then that's going to influence how you design your thesis structure. My own PhD by publication, when I came to look at how am I going to make this structure work, I included things like a preamble section on why I even did a thesis by publication, because this was back in 2012 and it was really, really quite new in my field. And so I needed to kind of talk everyone into why it should even happen. And then when it came to the structure, I explained why I chose this structure. And that structure was to have some kind of overarching sections where I would, within an overarching section, place a series of papers or a single paper or a couple of papers, depending on how I dealt with the issue relevant to that overarching section. And with that overarching section was additional kind of supporting material. Just kind of imagine it as you are holding the hand of the examiner and you are walking them through your PhD journey, and you're showing them the reason why these papers belong together in this section is because they deal with this common theme or common issue or common research question, and they deal with it from these different angles, because you also want to kind of foreground for the examiners that you haven't done anything unethical around salami slicing or duplicative publication, and show that each kind of aspect of your research is dealing with different facets. So what will happen is once you sit down with your supervisors, you come up with a structure that's going to work for you. That doesn't even lock you into that structure, because once you start actually writing it, you might be like, originally I wanted to have these overarching sections like Margaret talked about, but that totally doesn't work for me. I'd actually rather have just the 4 papers with just a brief preamble introduction to each paper, and I'm going to structure it like that, or these 2 belong together and this one should be by itself. And the logic will be there and it will be unique to your own work, but you should feel empowered because there are so many options and you're not locked in at QUT to one particular model, to embrace whichever model really works for telling your story in the most coherent and cogent way to draw in the examiners and really familiarize yourself with the merits of your work.
Oh, so beautiful. I love everything you said. And I particularly love the fact that, with your preamble, for example, remember the reader. I always say that I want to tattoo it on my head. It's the reader who's ultimately the examiner, as Margaret suggests. That's who you need to hold their hand, walk them through the document. Before we actually look at the structure, Marilyn, I might quickly bring you in. You're a supervisor of students doing thesis by publication. Do you sit with your students at the start, make a plan about the flow, the structure? How do you do that?
Absolutely. First of all, we talk about their writing, and if they feel as if they can do that. Some of my students have already published a research article, often from their masters, which gives you a good indication that they have that ability to be able to write in a short space of time, concisely. We definitely, as we're talking about the research questions, as we're preparing for stage 2, to say, what do we really want to find out? We already know this. What's the gap in the literature? And can we fill that gap by doing something meaningful, and will it fall into at least 3 different parts? Now, as Margaret has said, that might be 3 different research questions, or it might be different answers to one research question. So you might methodologically have a look at one research question from a qualitative point of view, and then you might do a survey and look at it from a quantitative point of view. And you'll get kind of different types of answers to that one question. But absolutely, we plan at least, this is your first paper, this is your second, and this is your third. As you say, sometimes it doesn't work out like that. Sometimes the paper 1 might be having to be put into 2 papers because you found so much information. Or sometimes the first couple of studies need to be combined into one paper because they were all so similar, even though you thought they might be different. In a research journey, you can't plan absolutely everything. It doesn't happen like that. If we already knew that, then it's not a PhD. It's a journey of ups and downs and bumps for supervisors as well as students. We don't know all the answers. This is a new question that the students have done. This is why it's so exciting to be able to supervise, because it's not boring. It's not the same thing. You have such fun in trying to work out what's going to be best. But yes, always, if the student says that they're thinking about publication, we have that conversation even at the second and third meeting.
Brilliant. And I think, I talked earlier about those transferable skills, and I think building resilience is one of those skills. And in fact, in our eGrad School modules, we have modules for HDR students on building those resilient skills throughout. So we'll get through to what the actual structures are, but you pointed out to Marilyn the importance, keeping this in mind, that your topics must be closely related. They're creating a cohesive narrative. And as Margaret said, you can have preambles prior to, plonking your paper in, explaining how it connects. But ultimately, what you're doing as an HDR student is having a significant and original contribution to knowledge in your discipline. All right, Margaret, we're going to look at a couple of your models. The first one is your sandwich model A. Do you want to talk us through this? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, just joining the gang. On one hand, I kind of do, and on the other hand, I kind of don't, because I feel like
I'll do it.
Yeah, sure. Knock yourself out.
All right, well, you jump in, but this sandwich model A, it's super clear. It's based on a minimum of 4 publications. It could be 3 papers in the middle as well. It's, as the name suggests, it's a sandwich. The papers are sandwiched in between an intro and a conclusion. Shannon and Margaret also have introduced something called the mega sandwich model. And in this case, the lit review is a chapter unto itself, just like a monograph. There's a research methodology unto a chapter unto itself. Chris, please, anyone, if you're out in the audience, you have particular questions about the models, it really is, and I say this to students when I'm in a one-to-one capacity, this is your baby. This is up to you. You can design this according to your research. So again, as Margaret said, please use them or don't use them. It's really up to you. The sandwich model B.
Thanks, Natasha. That's my biggest fear about the models. I mean, because I know both Shannon and myself have received emails saying, oh, do you mind if we change this model like this? And we're both looking at each other going, yes, take them. They're yours. You don't have to use the models. You could do anything you like with them. You could mix them up. The main point is, as we're all kind of reiterating, is that you pick that model that works for you and you change it up. You adapt it. You create super epic emperor sandwich model. You can knock knock it out of the park to fit your own purposes. So that's why, I mean, we really wanted to make the models, but on the other hand, we're also really nervous about making the models because of the fear that people would feel like they were being locked into picking one of them.
It's the same with templates. Students will come to us and say, do you have a template? Well, we do, but we don't really encourage it because everyone's research is so unique and bespoke, and really it is ultimately up to you. When I talked to Marilyn about a particular student who was advised at confirmation or final seminar to not do thesis by publication, I was in awe of Marilyn and so inspired by her saying, well, it's up to the student. It's their work. They need to talk to the supervisory team, but ultimately, this is your research, and you are more invested than anyone, and it's your name on it at the end. So I thank you for that, Marilyn, and thank you for allowing me to continue to refer students to you. This is the Mega Sandwich Model B. Similar idea, have the intro, lit review, and methodology as separate chapters if you like. And then moving along, unsurprisingly, we have a Sandwich Model C. So again, you can just see the papers are embedded within the chapters with preambles or however you want to organize that. But the book has lots of information explaining these models. And then there's the Mega Sandwich Model C. The 4 papers have been divided evenly into Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Again, it's up to you to go and have a look at the rules within your faculty. Is it 3 papers? Is it 4 papers? What are the rankings that are important? So that's your job to go and seek out that information as well. So at the start, I had Julie mention, and Julie was the person who brought this to my attention as well. She has used another author as well, or authors Nygaard and Solly, in their book Strategies for Writing a Thesis Publication in the Social Sciences and Humanities. And they look at visualizing the relationship. And I think there's power to that as well, putting it on paper and visualizing what it looks like. So I've just taken a couple of screenshots from their book, visualizing how the research question connects to the articles. You can see here another one as well. Again, maybe this just helps you with your particular research and your paper. So I'll just skim through these quickly. Maybe this makes sense to you and your particular research. Perhaps you can even create your own visualization of your own research and how it connects. This one is, you can see all integrated with the research question. And then we also have similar to the sandwich model as well. Something else, and I'm not sure, Deb, what you did, but there's also a model where you can actually attach the papers. What's it called in the appendix? Did you do that, Deb?
No, I actually had seen Margaret's model and did smush it around a little bit, so used it as a starting point. But then the way mine was, we did adapt it, but then I did actually use, and I put it into my thesis, that model back there with the arrows going which paper, which was answered by which question. So you kind of use the things that are going to be helpful to you. Yeah, and that's going to make it your own. I agree so much with what's being said. It's your paper. Nobody's ever going to sweat it the way you will or care about it the way you will. So it's got to be something that you feel proud of and something that works well for you.
Margaret, I think you can quote Deb smushed it around a little in your next book.
I absolutely love that, Deb. And I think you almost get a kind of a feeling as a researcher when you do find a model that works for you and you smush it around to the point where it just kind of clicks and you get a nice little feeling in your stomach. It's like, yeah, it's there. This is the way we want to tell this story. This works. And it's one of those little satisfaction moments that you get on a journey, which is often harsh and unrewarding, that kind of stand out for you for sure. So I do really love the wording of that. Thanks, Deb.
All right, so I just have this other slide because in Harry's team and in the Graduate Research Centre, I've talked to lots of people there who say to me, supervisors will the student will send in their document, it's finished, and then within a day they get it and go, oh, oops, you have to send it back, right, Harry? So this happens where you have to come in and tell us your experience.
Yeah, that's correct. So formatting is also very important for your thesis as well, because when you're gonna send this kind of document and it comes back and you're gonna see, oh, it's not working, and I'm pretty sure that you know that Microsoft Word sometimes is not your best friend as well. So be very careful when you do formatting. To look, some faculties also offer professional editing services to their HDR students as well, so you can use those funds. But be mindful that not all faculties have those funds available for that student, so they can actually help to build your thesis as well. So please do check with your faculty whether they allow you to use those funds for thesis editing services. Um, this can be a real help at the end of your candidature, and it can bring out the best of your thesis if you use the professional editing services for it. But please do check and see what's included and what's not included. We also have QUT preferred thesis editors as well, so that can help you too to build an awesome thesis. So please do check.
Yeah, great. There's a list somewhere. There's a link somewhere for them as well.
Yeah,
I'm
there
going
is
to
one. There is one. There is one. I'm trying to
Yeah.
find it out for you.
Yeah, if you can find it, put it into the chat. But I'm going to lean on you a little bit more here, Harry, at the end. We're just going to quickly talk about authorship. I've got lots of slides, but I'm mindful of the time as well. At QUT, so Harry can help with this. This is what must be included. Is obviously all of these points, but it's also the statement of original authorship. And so I've taken some screenshots here to show people what it looks like. There we go. And then this is actually from my own thesis. You can, if you are starting in stage 2, you can actually document it in an appendix right from the get-go. Consider telling, or, investigating yourself. What journals do you consider are considering using? What's their ranking? What's your database searches, which you will do in the AIRS course as well. Authorship, have you had that discussion on authorship? What is your plan? And also ethics. It's just something that you can put in your appendix right in your stage 2 document. So I also just have links again on the statement of contribution of authorship. Harry, did you want to talk about this at all?
Yes, I can briefly touch on this. Look, authorship is quite important. When, say, for example, you're a PhD student and you would like your thesis is going to be thesis by publication, you are not going to be the only author for your paper. So if you, as a PhD student, expectation is that you are the first author or first co-author for minimum of 2 publications that you have included in your thesis by publication. You would, if you are a first co-author of the paper, then you would have to provide a statement that yes, the other co-author is happy for you to include this in your thesis as a chapter, and we will check that. And please make sure that if you have engaged with another HDR student and you have published a paper together, then you would require to sort of send an email and let us know that who's going to be including this as a first author and what's the author contribution was in that particular research paper, because that can become quite tricky sometimes. So be absolutely mindful for that when it comes down to authorship and co-authorship. because we would like the student to have a unique sort of publication when they published in the journal article, and including that in their thesis as well. So please do be mindful. And if you have any question about the authorship, first to check with your supervisor. If you are unsure, you can also contact the academic lead of your particular school, and you're always welcome to reach out to GRC, and we can guide you through the process of authorship as well.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Harry. So I've actually just put a couple of screenshots about what the statement actually has that you can see. I've highlighted. Your authors may have participated in conception, execution, or interpretation. So these are the other parts. So they may not have actually written. So what I've done, I went into QUT ePrints, our thesis repository, and I've just grabbed anybody's thesis, and I just wanted to show you what it actually looks like, and how perhaps your supervisors may have contributed, and I've just highlighted that there for you as well. Again, it was taken from the thesis under revision, and it will tell you where your manuscript stands as well. So these are just some examples. And, you know, as Margaret was talking about that, having that little preamble before a paper. So I've actually found one here in a student's thesis, and showing how they've introduced the paper to come into the actual document. So you'll get these slides shortly. Please feel free to have a look at them, try to understand it all. We do repeat this workshop. So this is the last one for the year. And from the earlier one, the first iteration, there were some questions. I've taken those questions, I've put the answers to them on this page as well. If there are any questions, yes, Ross, you'll be getting the slides shortly. But I just also, from my perspective as the language and learning educator, is to remind you again, obviously, you need to have a coherent document regardless. We use this thread to tell you that that's what it is. Your job is to weave your document together so that your reader, which is, you know, your examiner, is not thinking too hard. You're guiding them the entire way through. And so that's what you need to do. Keep your document coherent, especially for a thesis by publication. We often think of your thesis as a story, and that's what you're doing. It's a big story. And I've also already mentioned the papers need to be closely related in terms of subject matter, which is why, as Marilyn said at the start, you talk to your supervisors why this is paper 1, this is paper 2, paper 3. How do they all connect? And use a narrative to fit them together for the reader. And remember, that's what you're doing, is having that coherent document. So what do examiners think? It's really important. They're the main audience. And I did mention this earlier. They want it to be a coherent document. And remember, I'll just read this out to you. The findings have to indicate they provide similar amounts of commentaries as compared to traditional theses, provide more feedback than summative assessment, and expected candidates to make changes on published chapters. So keep that in mind as well. And a couple of links to some authors who've written about this topic as well. Sharon and Vijay's information here. So we don't have time to listen to some past students, but there are clickable links to the video. It's on YouTube. We have a couple of students who I interviewed when I first created this workshop, and they told me, you know, what they thought. We actually are lucky to have Deb and Julie here today. You can hear them firsthand, but so really great video nonetheless for you to go and check out. And I think ultimately they all suggested that it was worth it. So I do try to keep these workshops at an hour and a half, but we are able, and thank you so much to my guests today. If you do have any questions, this is your chance to ask them. But I've just put a survey in the chat. If you could fill that in, I think there's 4 quick questions. I'd appreciate it. And I will get, before all of you go as well, this is the link to the website that has been created by Shannon, who's Margaret's co-author. I'll put that into the chat as well. She's got she's actually updated it. I was checking it out last night. There's sections for supervisors as well, and examination. So do go and have a look at this. It's like a repository for all things thesis by publication related. And Margaret was also has written on this blog. Margaret, do you want to tell us about this blog briefly?
Sure, super briefly. It's just a little piece I put together for the London School of Economics blog around thesis by publication policies and how we can make them most appropriate for students. And I know we're running out of time, so I just want to say one last thing, and that is, Natasha, you're fantastic. QUT students are really lucky to have Natasha and all of the other expert speakers today that put the time to come here and deliver that expertise. You're lucky to have it. We don't have a graduate research school at my university. So not only do you have people there to support your graduate research journey, but they're passionate about it, and they're delivering really high quality training. So I would encourage you, if you're going to be doing a thesis by publication, to keep coming to these kinds of sessions, because as you'll have already gauged from the session today, it's the tip of the iceberg that we were able to cover in the time available. One of the biggest hurdles I'll quickly cover around for my students is changing their mindset and realizing when they're writing for publication, they're not necessarily writing for a friendly audience. Some journals have a 4% accept rate, some have lower. So we're talking about a quality of writing, which is something that Marilyn's talked a lot about, which was great. A quality of writing and a quality of research that is much, much higher than a lot of you will be hitting at the early stages of candidature, because that's what's expected, because your PhD is a research apprenticeship. So you are going to build up to those skills, but it is important to come into that journey with the knowledge that there will be a lot of upskilling involved in many cases, and that's going to hurt a little bit. I remember from my own journey that, constant process of moving up. The feedback through peer review can sometimes be absolutely brutal, because they don't know you and you don't know who they are, so they just absolutely unleash. And you'll need to work closely with your supervisory team and to continue to come along to the training provided by Natasha in order to continue that iterative upskilling process. So thanks again for letting me be part of the session today. I really enjoyed it.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you. All right, well, we're getting lots of nice comments. Thank you, everyone, but no actual questions. So again, feel free to reach out to me and everybody else in the team, and you will be getting these slides shortly. But again, Marilyn, Catherine, Harry, Cameron, and Debbie and Julie, thank you. Thank you so much. Margaret, of course. So excellent. Yeah, I'll be sending the slides out. I actually teach a workshop on presentations, and I always say, just end nicely with a warm smile. So I think I'm just going to show this last slide, because we do have an online conference coming up. It's online, it's free, it's on the potential of AI in research, and I'm a big fan of AI in research. I know not everyone is, but please consider coming along to that when you get the slides. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to say thank you so much. Warm smile. All the best with your presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.